Good morning, and thank you for having us. My name is Mackenzie Price, and this is my colleague Marta Baffy. I thought I'd click the slide. And we're very happy to be with you today. Our theme for today is, as we can see up here, how to make communication with your customers clearer and more effective, empathetic, and service-oriented, as the message that we want to share with you. A little bit about our backgrounds. We both come from Georgetown University, and our discipline is linguistics, which you may or may not have heard of. What that discipline is we study the way people communicate, how that is a part of social life. So we spend all of our time researching how people share information with one another and really transfer information as effectively as possible. And as we discussed in our introduction, Marta is also a lawyer and teaches in the law school, and I teach in the business school. And we also teach undergraduate classes together sometimes, so that's how we know each other. And I would like to get the ball rolling. So this is our agenda for today. We're going to start with introductions. We would like the chance to get to know all of you a little bit better. And we've got 2 units that we're going to be covering today. So our first is improving clarity with written documents, because we know that a lot of your communication with your customers happens through letters and emails and other written forms. And we're also going to talk about interactions that happen over the phone. So how can we communicate this message of service when we're not face-to-face, but when we're talking over the phone to people? And we'll take questions and concerns towards the end of the session. Part of why we wanted to know, your names and also how you are involved here at the DCHA, just so we could get a sense of what the different types of interactions you're going to have as a part of your job. And so just by listening to you, we've definitely gotten the sense that you are heavily engaged with your customers, but you talk to them about a variety of things. So some of the conversations that you have to have might be very technical about the rules of the program or legal regulations, but you also are talking to people about their personal problems, and you're also on top of that talking to people about the ins and outs of living in a home. So the physical structure, electrical issues. The point here is that you have a lot of different interactions that you're having, and you're very, very busy. I know that you know that. We want you to know that we recognize, we see you, we see the challenges that you have. And I think it's important to just say that from the get-go. We'd also like to start just to ask you about the types of communication problems that you might have when you're talking to some customers. So if you could give us a few examples just to get the ball rolling. So maybe communication issues you have on the phone or email or even in person. Would anyone like to share?
Well, sometimes when my clients call me on the phone, they already have their agenda in mind, so they'll rattle off their agenda, and most of our calls come through the call center, so they already know I'm going to be their inspector for that day. So they'll tell me, well, you're my inspector, and I'll say, well, I haven't got my schedule yet. Then because they have their own agenda, they just keep telling me on and on whatever their intentions are, but I'll be trying to tell them, once I get my schedule, I'll call you back.
Okay.
So I can talk more intelligent with them.
Okay.
So I find that to be very anxious. So I don't want to start off with a conversation where a person thinks I don't hear them.
Right.
Because that's not good.
Right.
But at the same token, I do want to talk to them intelligently, so I won't know the address until it's given to me.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a perfect example. We're actually going to look at an example just like the one you've brought up. So thank you for that example. Other examples?
Hostile.
Okay.
Hostile in my field. They come in the office. I sit in the back, but I can hear them up front. They totally ignore the front office staff. And the first thing, I want Miss Harvell. I can hear them all the way up in the front. But I want Miss Harvell. I don't want to talk to you. Da, 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 da. So I sit back there in the back and let myself calm down, because I know they're already coming in being hostile. So I have to rein myself in, go out front, and then escort them back into my office. And I sit at my desk and let them sit. I have a couch right there. The couch sits there and it relaxes them because it's so soft. So I let them vent, right, Ms. Miller? I let them vent. I just sit there and just let them vent because it's something that they want to get off their chest. So after they finish venting, and then I can have a reasonable conversation with them. They came in hostile, but they leaving out with a smile. So
Okay.
that's how I work it.
So there's a lot of pressure, stress, tension, and emotion there. What I'm also hearing you say, though, is really great, is that you understand that that intensity that they come in with doesn't really have anything to do with you. They
Correct.
need to just cool down a little bit, and then we
Correct.
can get to the business at hand.
Correct.
That's excellent. Maybe one more? Yes.
A lot of our, well, sometimes they're not even our clients. People will call in and say, I saw a sign and y'all selling a house. I said, what did the sign say? It said DC Housing. I said, did it say DC Housing Authority? Did it say DC Housing Community Development? Did it say DC Housing and DHCD? No, I just said DC Housing. Okay, but I need to know which housing did it say? I say because it says housing does not mean that it's DC Housing Authority. DC Housing Authority, we own our own property and you have to be on our wait list to get into our property. We're not in the business of really selling our homes. We're in the business of helping people who's in low income to get homes. But if you're trying to buy a house, that's not us. Well, it said DC Housing, but which one? So they said, well, let me call you back. They said, oh, it was community development. I said, okay, let me get that number. So as soon as they say DC Housing, they assume it's DC Housing Authority.
Okay, so there's some confusion, shall we say, out there in the world about what is it exactly that you are responsible for and what the resources that you can point people towards.
If it's an abandoned house, if a tree fell over in a house, if somebody threw some trash in the yard, everything belongs to us.
You're busy. You're very busy people. Okay, those are great examples. Thank you for sharing them with us, and I think they'll tie very nicely with what we're going to talk about today. Our first step with any situation that's having communication problems is to figure out what some of the sources of these problems are. And I don't know if you'll find this comforting per se, but you are not the only agency or institution that faces the difficulties that you've expressed here today. So that's part of looking at other communities is how we're bringing in some of the tips that we're going to share with you today. Our first tip, which we just got a great example of from Ms. Ellis, a lot of your customers don't know what institutions or government organizations do, and they don't know why you do what you do. And this is just a fact of life, a lot of the procedures that you have to follow, a lot of your policies were designed to help organizations run more efficiently, and that's fine, and you are very concerned with efficiency, but that's not clear to someone on the outside, and that's part of why these interactions are so difficult, is that there's a lot that makes perfect sense to you. You work in this organization, you do this every day, but when people come to you, they're completely unfamiliar with your organization, and they've got a lot of stress and pressure, and those two forces are competing with each other, and that can be very difficult. Our second point is that customers can misunderstand your intentions. What we are hearing you say, and we also heard this in some of the examples that Beata and Imhotep shared with us, is that you do have a commitment to service and good service. You want to help people with very real and difficult problems. But unfortunately, people don't always see that in you. They think you're not helpful, they think you're bossy, they think you're rude, they think you don't care, and that's not true. And part of our message today is to think about how you can send that implicit message that you care, because we can tell when people care about us. So how can we send that message to people and maybe cut through some of the emotion that's already there in the first place? And this is a similar point, what we call a double bind. So you have competing needs. You need to be efficient and get your job done, but you also want to provide excellent service. It's hard to find that balance. It's something that we're constantly working towards, and that's what brings us here today. And then you're busy, so you've got a lot to do. You have to offer service, but but part of offering service is actually a whole bunch of other activities. You have to ask questions, you have to gather information, you have to come up with a plan, you have to solve people's problems, you have to give instructions, you have to check up on those instructions to see if they've been followed. So these are a lot of activities that you have to do at the same time you're trying to provide this excellent service. So these are some of the reasons why situations like this can even happen, because there's just a lot going on. There are really 3 ways that interactions can go. So 3 approaches to service that exist out there in the world. And I'll show you all 3. You can probably guess which one we're going to push you towards today. So the first is task-centered or direct approaches to service. So this is asking very direct questions, using commands to give instructions. So fill this out, do this, come here, and giving very minimal responses to the questions you might get from customers. So when I say a minimal response, I mean something like yes, as opposed to yes and, or yes but, or yes, what comes next. Another approach is what we call a conventionally polite approach. So this is using more indirect questions to gather information. So good morning, may I help you? May I have your name? As opposed to tell me your name. Will you please fill out this form? As opposed to fill out this form. And the last one is a rapport building approach. So trying to make connections with people. And some of the ways you can do that is have a customer focused approach where you're really interested in what the customer's needs, feelings, and voice is or are. So one way to do this is to add what could be called less formal communication into the interactions that you're having. So when people make small talk with you, make small talk back, even if it takes a few extra moments. Apologize for problems that people are having. Even if you didn't actually do anything, it can still be helpful to say, I'm sorry this happened, let's talk about it. And even something as simple as using a customer's name can really go a long way towards building rapport. Now, as I said, you can probably guess which one matches what you're interested in and what we are advocating for. And I will just say that our whole discussion today is moving away from approach 1. Part of what makes approach 1 dangerous is that you can be misunderstood if you just focus on getting the task done. Yes, efficiency is very important, but people outside of the organization don't understand or may not respect that you're just trying to get things done and it has nothing to do with anything else. So we always have to send those unspoken messages of support, caring, and helpfulness with everything that we do. And with that, I will hand over to you.
All right. So one way to kind of show, or in order to be conventionally polite and rapport building, you also have to communicate very clearly and effectively. So we're going to talk about some tips for how to do that first. And these tips sort of come from a movement called Plain English. Have any of you heard of the Plain English movement?
No.
So it's the idea, it's in healthcare, it's in law, and it's the idea that we should communicate as clearly and as concisely as possible for people to understand us. And this is what I teach my law students too. We want to communicate as clearly and as precisely as possible. So I'm going to show you 4 tips for how to do this. And these may not make sense at first, but then we'll look at some examples. So, number 1, use common everyday words and avoid technical jargon. 2, prefer the active voice and use personal pronouns such as I, you, and we. 3, use verbs instead of nominalizations. And 4, use short sentences with 1 or at most 2 ideas per sentence. So Beata and Imhotep sent us, just 1 second. So they sent us some documents that you all give your customers. And some of them are very lengthy, and I assume pretty hard for them to understand. And I think you probably helped them a lot in filling them out. And so we looked at those documents, and we checked whether they adhere to these 4 guidelines. And in some ways they do, in some ways they don't. So we've collected 4 examples of sentences that could be revised to better adhere to these guidelines. So we'll go over those with you right now. Thanks. So we studied these different documents. So the application for continued occupancy, you're probably familiar with that. Preparing for your recertification interview. And again, we've checked whether they adhere to these guidelines. So let's look at a few examples. So remember, number one was the use common everyday words and avoid technical jargon. Jargon is really sort of the words used in a particular profession. So here's an example from the application for continued occupancy. Please indicate if you have any expenses related to attendant care or auxiliary apparatus for a disabled family member that you are paying. You are not receiving reimbursement. So I've underlined the phrases, the terms and words that I think might be difficult for people to just understand. I actually myself didn't know what an auxiliary apparatus was at first. I had to think about it quite a bit, and I actually did some research and I figured out, so it's something like a wheelchair or something like that. But I suspect, your customers may not know immediately what that means. So you want to sort of simplify that somehow so it's really clear what that means. So here's our revised version. Please indicate if you are paying someone to care for a disabled family member, period. Also indicate if you're paying for an auxiliary apparatus for the family member, for example, a wheelchair, oxygen equipment, or equipment added to cars to allow a disabled person to use them, period. If someone is repaying you for these costs, do not list these costs. So, thank you. So there's really two ways to go about it. You can either reword it by using more plain, what we're calling plain terms. So instead of attendant care, it's paying someone to care for. Instead of reimbursement, it's repay. Or if you can't really come up with another term like auxiliary apparatus, you can give examples of what that means. And that really clarifies it.
They understand exactly all of this.
Yeah. Okay, so that's our first tip. And stop me if you have questions, by the way. Okay, our second tip is prefer the active voice and use personal pronouns such as I, you, we. So I'll show you what that means. So here's an example from preparing for your recertification interview. Enclosed with your recertification notification letter are a series of forms that must be completed in order to process your recertification. So you'll see I underlined must be completed and to process. So these are verbs, they're actions, but the human subject, who is actually supposed to be doing the completing and the processing, is completely concealed. So we don't know who's doing that. And you can figure it out, but it's much clearer if you put that human subject in the beginning of your sentence and the action right after it. So we have rewritten it as you received a series of forms with your recertification notification letter. You must complete these forms so that we can process your recertification. Now it's clear that you received it, you must complete it, we process. So it's clear who is doing what. Okay. So I think, and we'll see this in a moment when we look at an email correspondence as well, using we is going to be really important, also to connect with your audience and with your customers. Okay, the third one is use verbs instead of nominalizations. So does anyone know what a nominalization is? It's a fancy word, and it itself is a nominalization, actually. A nominalization is basically a verb or an adjective expressed in noun form. So instead of, for example, instead of misrepresent, you say misrepresentation. Okay, so it's a verb that becomes a noun, and it's very common in legal language. And it actually makes the writing very dense and very cluttered and hard to understand. So we pulled an example from the application for continued occupancy, and I'll read it. I understand that any misrepresentation of information or failure to disclose information requested on this form may disqualify me from consideration for continued participation and may be grounds for eviction, termination of assistance. I've underlined every nominalization in this sentence, which could be a verb. Now, when you read this, you've probably seen this many times, but a person, if they read it for the first time, it's kind of hard to understand exactly what's going on there because all of these actions are changed into nouns. So it's hard to figure out who's doing what. So we've revised it. I understand that if I provide false, incomplete, or inaccurate information on this form, I may no longer participate. I also understand that if I provide false, incomplete, or inaccurate information on this form, my landlord may evict me and/or DCHA may discontinue my assistance. So now it's clear who is doing what, right? Assistance, that remains, so that's still a nominalization. I mean, you could probably even further simplify that if you wanted to. But the idea here is we've got our personal pronouns, I and we, and other actors like landlord and DCHA, and clear verbs. Okay. And then the last thing is use short sentences with one or at two most ideas per sentence. I have to say, reading these documents, actually, the documents were great in this respect. So most of the documents did have very nice, short, not very short, but had pretty short sentences with about one idea, maximum of two. But there were a couple that were a little bit longer and could be broken up. So one example of this is from the authorization for the release of information to the DCHA. If the reported information is not accurate, your current rental assistance may be terminated and your future request for HUD rental assistance may be denied for a period of up to 10 years from the date you moved out of an assisted unit or were terminated from an HUD rental assistance program. That's a mouthful to even say, right? So for a reader to sort of understand that and parse that is also difficult. So you want to break it up into, maybe one idea or two ideas per sentence. So for example, if the information you provided is not accurate, we may discontinue your current rental assistance, period. In addition, if you make any future requests for HUD assistance, we may deny this for a period of up to 10 years from 1, the date you moved out of an assisted unit, or 2, the date you were terminated from an HUD rental assistance program. So in that second sentence, it's still pretty long, but we sort of broke it up with this 1 and 2. This kind of enumeration also really helps readers to understand more clearly what you're trying to communicate. Okay. Any questions on that?
I just applaud you. You did great.
Thanks. Yes.
I have a question. Like the last one that you guys used as an example, that is actually regulation from HUD's, that's HUD regulation. That's their particular form. So I think that's just a form that they use.
Okay.
I don't know. Can you break that down if it's there?
Yeah, I don't know. If it's their document and you're not supposed to change it, of course, then you can't do anything about that. But going forward with your documents or even your email correspondences that you send to your customers, it's good to keep this in mind. Yeah, but I suspect you probably can't change another authority's forms or something like that. Any other questions?
All right. For our second half, but our first activity of the day, we're going to be talking about email communication. So when Beata and Imhotep first invited us, they mentioned that there were some difficulties with emailing customers back and forth and what customers are sending to you and how to respond, etc. So we asked them to send us some examples of emails that you had received and the responses that you sent out, and that's the basis for our activity today. So our first step is to look at this email. We call it email number 6 because it was the 6th email that we got from someone who is writing into you. So Marta is handing out a handout that has the text of this email for you, and it's up here on the screen, but I will read it to you and then we'll move on to the next part of our activity. So this email from July 16th reads, "Hello, my name is," and the name's been removed, "and I have a 3-year-old son. We've been staying with my mother since my son was born, and since my mother lost her job, we are being evicted with no place to go. I've put my name on the housing list, and I haven't heard back yet to see if I'm eligible for housing. My son and I will be homeless. I have no family members to stay with, and I'm praying that I will get a call from housing so that my son and I will have a place to stay. I'm desperate and willing to take any available place you can place me." Now this is I'll make this point very briefly, but that's not what we're going to focus on. Now up here, and you have the actual handout, this is the exact text that we got. And it is possible for someone to receive this email and come away with a judgment about the person who sent it based on maybe I added some punctuation when I read it aloud to you or whatnot. Our point is that making that judgment is not necessary and completely external to your mission. So what we'd like to ask you now is to focus on what is it that this customer is asking for, because regardless of what the text of the email looks like, we can come away with a list of things that this customer is asking with this written communication. And so Marta will take notes for us. So what are some of the things that this customer is asking for?
Housing.
Housing, okay. Help. Anything
Direction.
else? Okay.
Instruction.
Immediate attention.
Other thoughts? I'm not pausing because I'm looking for a particular answer. I'm giving you space to think.
She's also looking for resolution. Yeah, resolution or resolve in a return call.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, if we think about what we've come up with here at this list, this kind of divides up in a couple of ways. So some of these are concrete things, housing, a response, right? Instruction, so concrete deliverables. But some of them are feelings are involved here. So attention, a resolution. So people are asking for information, yes, but there's a little bit more to it than that. And that sense is very clear here amongst this group, and that's excellent. Now, let's take a minute and look at the response that this customer received, and I'll let Marta.
So we'll read it. It's actually on the back side of this. So let's read it. Let's read it together. Okay, this correspondence is in response to your letter sent to the office of Adrian Todman, Director of the District of Columbia Housing Authority, DCHA. It was forwarded to the Client Placement Division, CPD. Records in CPD show you applied for public housing voucher program on 8/14/12, marking the preference rent burden. Your update 2014 was received. You are active on both waiting lists. Applications are selected from the waiting list in accordance with federal and local regulations based on date and time of application and preference. The preference structure for the Housing Choice Voucher Program is ranked as follows: homeless, unit unfit for habitation, unit with violation codes, displaced, and rent burden. The preference structure for public housing includes disabled, elderly, and working family. There are currently more than 67,000 applicants in the top preference category of homeless. DCHA is not an emergency housing program. Applicants can only be offered housing assistance when their application for a specific program reaches the top of that program's waiting list. Okay. Okay, when we received samples of email correspondence, right, the initial email from the customer, they were all different. But the reply, some of them were basically exactly the same, but some of the words were different. So maybe the preference category was different, but it seems like there was some kind of template that was used, and that was used here too. So what we want to do right now is take about 10 minutes. You'll break into groups of 3, so you can kind of,
With your neighbor or
with the people next to you, and discuss, I think, maybe 4 or 5 questions. So first, did the DCHA response answer customer 6's questions and requests, which we wrote up here? Did the DCHA response provide any additional information that the customer didn't ask for? Discuss the importance of this information. Did the DCHA response communicate empathy and helpfulness? If so, how did the response communicate these values? If not, where could the response have communicated these values? And lastly, did the DCHA response communicate its message clearly? Okay, so take about 10 minutes or so and talk about that with the people next to you.
They scrambled out the name. Did they provide any additional information that the customer?
So what are you thinking?
So she did say to know what the first answer was, yes, because of the rags that surrounds the program. They answered it perfectly.
Reference calendar of homeless. DCHA is not an emergency housing. She didn't ask all that. So we want to identify how many, that's what we're saying.
Even if,
Because I thought it was contact.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the thoughts that came up in your discussion. Does anyone want to share what your group talked about? Yes.
So the main thing that we discussed was the second point where we just gave too much information in this email. We were talking amongst ourselves, and what we thought would be a better idea is that when, instead of sending a blanket, generic email in response to a person asking where they are on the waiting list, a more appropriate response would to maybe direct them to have some face-to-face contact. That would be, you know, more of a correlation as to say, okay, instead of giving you all the legal and regulations and policies and everything, we would just say, you know, hey, we have more information, resources on our website, or if you would like to come into our walk-in days and talk to someone. Or, you know, there wasn't a number on the email to follow up with this person, but, you know, just giving generic information, this is kind of depressing because it's like, okay, yeah, I qualify for both programs and I'm on the waiting list for both of them, but then I'm number 67,000. Where am I in that? You know, which, okay, I know I'm homeless, but, you know, there's other factors, you know, we said, you have just too much, so.
Okay.
And they didn't even close it with thank you or any of the proper closures. They just left it hanging. Or contact me at this number.
Right.
More information, you know.
That's a great point that we'll talk about, but I'll bring it up now. So you always want to treat interactions that you have via email or over the phone just like it was a face-to-face. So you would never just leave someone like that, because if I did that to you, that would make you feel terrible. We know that's wrong for our social interactions, and we apply the same expectations that we have for face-to-face with communication that happens via email. So thank you for making that point. And your points about there was a lot of information that the customer didn't ask for is a good one also. So why, I think we agree that that information could leave some negative feelings with customers. I heard that come out in multiple groups. But we should also acknowledge that it might be there for a reason. So why, what is the value of saying that there are 67,000 people on the waiting list?
I mean, that's the person. Yeah, so make you know, to, you know, get you to understand there's a lot of people
Right.
in your same situation.
Right, exactly. So
Fair housing requires you to disclose.
okay. So see, yeah.
Have to be done as well with the DC Housing Authority.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we do the selection process, how it goes. So I think, you know, the additional information is a very good one.
Right.
Gives the client an idea of, okay, where am I?
Mhm.
And so this is how we do the selection.
Right.
We're not being left out. It's not like we're being just left out there. But this is
Right,
how
you
we
want
do
to
the
know
selection.
what's going on.
Yeah.
So
But
this
you're
is a,
managing, I'm sorry.
Oh,
but
go ahead.
You're managing expectations, but at the same time, the initial letter from the client definitely showed that she was desperate.
Right.
There was no sentence structure at all. It was completely run on. So therefore, I would think that even though we want to give that information and manage the expectations, that's not the first thing you want to do.
Right.
Because that's not showing the feeling that as an agency you want to address her issue. Her issue wasn't about what our agency is doing. It was about her desperate situation.
Personalizing.
Right, exactly. So I understand from an agency standpoint to manage those expectations, but to do it in such a kind of cold, blunt way can actually come across, you know, a little bit harsh.
right. So this is a perfect real life example of one of the points we made in the beginning, is that you've got competing interests and that you do have policies that you have to follow. So you have to disclose this, but we want to focus on how you're going to disclose it. And then at the same time, you need to take in what the customer is telling you, this desperation, and what does that actually mean? And where does addressing that fall in relation to giving them these instructions and whatnot. So with this example, we've embodied what we were talking about. in the beginning of this activity. You were going to share
Yeah,
something.
I was going to say that it could have been great help to notify the client that the waiting list is closed and that they were purging, that they're currently purging the waiting list, so that there is hope. Not only
Okay.
are there 67,000 people on the waiting list, but it's not going to be. It may not be long. Just all those people may not even be eligible for housing. So I think that would have been great to address, so that she may know, this is what it is that we have to deal with. These people are looking for housing as well, but they may not even be eligible. And so, it's a possibility that your name could reach to the top of that list.
Right, that's a great point, and there isn't a way to know that specific point at this juncture. Yes.
What do you think about letting them know maybe where they stand on that 67?
Yeah, actual figure.
I mean, your number.
So that's a good question. That's a good question. So we know that based on some of the information that DCHA and Imhotep provided, we understand that you cannot give an actual specific status. So that's another example of being constrained by some of the requirements that are out there. But that is a great piece of
Or you're in the top 10%
information.
of the.
Well, I know that they
Yeah.
do, I've heard that they do disclose what year they're currently working on. And it's based on, it may not be a specific number, but
you
based
can-
on when you apply, this is the year that they're working on. So you may have applied in 2000 and they're working on 1995. So,
Okay.
that's a little bit closer than 67,000 in your mind.
So that's a great concrete detail that could definitely be shared.
Are maybe also providing additional maybe resources outside of DCHA?
Yes, that's a point that came up a lot, especially as it relates. I don't think a group said this. I imagined that someone said, talking about, or no, maybe it was you, Ms. Ellis, talking about emergency housing.
Outside of the
Okay, that was outside of it. Okay.
If we had a list saying, even though we're not on an emergency housing program, but there are other resources outside of the agency.
Yes.
And here are the numbers, and call those and see.
Yes.
Okay. Wonderful.
So we prepared an alternative response, and we'll give you a copy of it as well. We tried to sort of capture the meaning of this because we don't fully understand all of this as well. So we hope that it was accurate. But you'll see one of the things that we did is we tried to add this, I think, Arlene, you were saying this human touch. So let's see what you think. So you can pass that around. And then I'll read it out loud. And you'll see that we put some comments on the side. Those are just some of our comments as we go over it together. Okay. So it says, "Dear customer name, we hope this message finds you well. This correspondence is in response to the letter you sent to the office of Adrienne Todman, Director of the DCHA. Your letter was forwarded to the Client Placement Division. Our records in the CPD show that you applied for the Public Housing and Housing Choice Voucher Program on August 14, 2012. You marked the preference rent burden. We received your 2014 update. You're active on both waiting lists. We select applications from the waiting list following federal and local regulations based on 1, the date and time of application, and 2, the applicant preference marked on each application. We process Housing Choice Voucher Program applications in the following order: homeless, unit not fit for occupancy, unit has housing violation codes, displaced, and rent burden. Descriptions of these application preferences can be found here. The preference structure for public housing includes disabled, elderly, and working family. We can only offer housing assistance when an application reaches the top of a program waiting list. There are currently more than 60,000 applicants in the homeless category. We continue to work tirelessly to serve all applicants for DCHA housing assistance programs. Unfortunately, we do not offer emergency housing. If you need emergency housing, please contact, and then you can have contacts there. Sincerely, Okay, so let's go over some of the, I'll go over some of the language features that we changed or things that we added and how that adds this sort of empathetic human touch. And then Mackenzie will talk a little bit about the content and the things that we were a little bit confused about as well. So first you'll see we have a greeting, right? Dear customer name. So that kind of personalizes the communication. I think when I was talking with you ladies, you mentioned that this seems almost like she's just a number. The original seemed kind of like she was just a number. This kind of makes it seem like, okay, I recognize you're a human being and I want to help you. That first line, we hope this message finds you well, it further personalizes that. It's, I actually care about how you feel. Then you'll see we bolded all of these uses of we plus a verb. So we hope, we received, we select, we process. You wouldn't have to do that in the email. We did that to show you that we've changed this. We've taken some of these nominalizations and we've made them into verbs. So it's really clear who is doing what. And it's really clear that we are doing things for you, right? So by drawing attention to we, it shows that we are actually doing things for you. And that further humanizes the process. It suggests that people are doing the receiving, people are doing the processing. It's we're doing all that work for you. And it makes it clearer to understand. Okay, the other thing is, you'll see in the fifth sort of paragraph where it says, we can only offer housing assistance when an application reaches the top of a program waiting list. There are currently more than 67,000 applicants. We continue to work tirelessly to serve all applicants. So this again demonstrates the dedication of the staff because I know you all care and you want to convey that. And I think this conveys that accurately. And then I know a lot of us touched on this last part about emergency housing. It's not enough to just say, we don't offer it because that's not a big help. So as you all mentioned, maybe provide some contacts there or provide some other agencies that might be able to help. And then lastly, of course, close with a closing. So sincerely and your name, probably your phone number, so if they want to meet with you face-to-face or your division or something like that. So all of these language features, a lot of which was just pulled from the plain English stuff that we talked about, it makes this big difference. And it shows the person, the customer here, that we really care. And we want to help you to communicate with you clearly. Okay, so Mackenzie, you can talk a little bit about some of the questions that we had.
Now I'd like to talk about, add to some of what Marta just pointed out and why we made some of the changes to the content that we made. So as Marta said, we started off with a greeting because we're trying to create that polite or even connection building frame that we mentioned at the beginning of this session, and Marta definitely talked about that. Another item that we have on here is that we recommend writing out dates, and so the original response wrote the dates numerically, so 3/7/whatever, but not all cultures write dates that way. So it can, or people may not be used to seeing dates represented that way, period. So writing the dates out can fix that problem right off the bat. And so I'd like to jump down to the paragraph that starts, we process housing choice voucher programs, talking about that paragraph. And it gives this order for the way that the applications are selected and calls this a preference structure. Now, when Marta and I were looking at the original email, we didn't really understand what that means. And that's an example of a term that might mean something very specific in the agency, but it's not clear to someone outside what that might mean. So we talked about it and assumed or intuited that it meant the order that applications are reviewed. But even if it means the order that the applications are reviewed, that's not even clear. Maybe it's the case that you review them all and then you put them into categories. It's not clear just from that phrase, preference structure, what actually happens when you get the application. Or even if that's something that is on the original application. So does a customer select their own what would you even call that activity? Their own category? You don't want to call it a ranking because that sounds mean. Right. So one of our recommendations is to think about what exactly it is you're trying to tell people there, and how, if you want to, how to amend that term. And so I'll read this paragraph in its entirety again. We process housing choice voucher program applications in the following order: homeless, unit not fit for occupancy, unit has housing violation codes. So you'll see that we even broke down the preference categories to be more clear about what they're talking about. Displaced and rent burden. Descriptions of these housing preferences can be found here. That's our text that we've added. And then the preference structure for public housing includes disabled, elderly, and working family. Now, Marta and I got these emails a couple of weeks ago, so we spent a long time looking at these. And it was just this morning that we realized that this sentence, the preference structure for public housing, is a completely different preference structure than the HCVP. And so that is not clear. Weeks to get that. Like, we just got that this morning.
We read this 20 times and we didn't get that.
And when we were confused before, the reason why we were confused is that we said, okay, you gave us this order of preferences, but then how does disabled, elderly, and working family fit into that? We thought you were talking about one big preference structure, but then disabled, working family, that wasn't numbered. So do I fall into a special case if I fall into one of these? Our message is that we were confused. So one way you could alleviate that confusion is to start a new paragraph right there. So a new paragraph that says, we process the preference structure for public housing in the following order, and then tell people what the order is. And that way it'll be clear that there are two different systems going on for how these types of assistance are being processed.
It's not.
All right.
There's a lot of other variables that go into how someone would be qualified for housing. So we can identify A, B, C, D, but someone else, it could be A, C, B, and they fit into it because the housing that is available, they now fit into it, and that's what we can offer. So it's not really, I don't see that as being, I don't think it would be wise to be that clean cut in that area for a letter.
Okay.
Because someone's going to hold us to
Right.
it being, this is the category, why don't I fit in it? Why my neighbor just found out they got housing and they have 5 children and I only have 2.
Okay, so that's a great point to find a way to include in here. So we need to, what you're saying is we have to move away from giving the impression that it's a up linear structure. Okay.
Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not an ABC structure.
But I have,
Is that right, Eric?
No, you're right. I think, though, that the overarching message that you guys are trying to deliver to us is, as bureaucrats, we know how to speak bureaucratic language very, very well to each other, to other bureaucrats, etc. But the two of you, both experienced, educated persons, come to this, and you're having difficulty understanding what the heck we're talking about.
That's exactly what I hear.
So if others are coming with perhaps not as much experience and training as you have, it may be a challenge, and then we need to figure out how to get back to the common language or common English or whatever the term was on the front end, so that we can actually communicate what our needs are as opposed to talking to each other with our language.
Right.
Is that right?
Yes.
But that is, but Shanita's right though, because there are many other
Right.
variables, so we have to be careful about that.
Well, if that's true, then this should definitely not say we process in the following order. If that's not true, don't say that.
But he did say that in the
Original
original
email.
email as well.
So there are people out there, it seems, who are thinking that there is going to be an order. And you're absolutely right. That would be heartbreaking if you think there's an order and then you get this extra information that, someone else has
now with all
gotten.
that said, a question mark comes in my head as being this person. How did they come up with rent burden after reading her email? If she could be homeless. I mean, they automatically said to her in the email they gave her back. I think they stated that she came under the category of rent burden, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, it's a,
She
here's
marked
what
that preference.
The challenge that we have as an organization is that we when it's convenient for us, let me just fall out of the sword. When it's convenient for us to speak legalese, we do, right? And so rent burden has a legal technical term that we are now in this document relying on, okay, because it's convenient for us.
Okay.
The whole purpose of this series of training is to reverse that so that we're communicating in a way that folks can hear it. So we need to get away from the legalese.
Okay.
And we need to define what we mean when we say rent burden. So let me tell you what, we're all rent burden.
Right.
But legally, we don't qualify for a rent burden qualification. We don't.
and so, I mean, speaking to that point, so did we know specifically that rent burden was a legal term? No, but we could have guessed. But that is why we added the line that says descriptions can be found here. As our point is that we wanted to make a gesture towards decrypting what that means. All right, and then what other points that I wanted to make? So in the next paragraph that reads, we can only offer housing assistance. So even, again, a term like that, what does that mean? Does that mean only HCVP or public housing? Is housing assistance a whole other list and system? Or do you actually just mean we can only help you in any way when your application reaches the top of the list? So again, our challenge is to think about what exactly is it that you're trying to tell people, and what do terms or phrases like this tell people, because it's not immediately clear. And adding we continue to work tirelessly to serve all applicants. This is another example of trying to make that connection and adding the human touch. As we said, you are very committed to service. You can tell people that you're committed to service. People will value hearing that message, and this is an opportunity to share that message. Offering emergency housing or other avenues or agencies that people can pursue. We've talked about that. And then adding a sign-off, so sincerely, and then a name that corresponds to whoever prepared this correspondence. Well, again, treat this email exchange like a face-to-face. So you say hello and goodbye. You want to do the same thing when you're communicating in this format. Any other comments or questions about what we have here?
Well, you surely got me thinking, because reading this and then seeing what you wrote down here, it really put a lot of question marks. So where you couldn't understand it, then there's many question marks out there also.
And here's the thing, if I may just add this, the thing that we have to keep in mind, and I know you know this intuitively, but because we live in an environment where folks manage us through politics and lawsuits. Okay, and so what we end up doing is cutting and pasting a lot. And so the documents that you're using here are perfect examples of us becoming, what's the word? There it is.
What is it?
Lazy.
Oh, wow.
So, because, and that's just a normal thing for us to do, because we've got a lot of stuff going on, we got a lot of clients coming at us, and the last thing any of us in this room want to do is what? Depositions. So we don't want to be there, right? So what we do is we go cut, paste, because you know why? Because somebody over here said that this language will keep you from doing what? Depositions, right? Or losing your job. So we go cut and paste. There you go. So what we have to do is we've got to be committed here to when we go back to where we live and work every day to really challenge ourselves to say, okay, I know I need to not A, lose my job, or B, show up in the courtroom. What, though, can I do to communicate more effectively? And let me check with my supervisor to make sure that this fits.
And thank you for making that point, because this notion of managing people through lawsuits and whatnot, underneath that, we're talking about managing people through fear. That's terrible. No one wants to do that. Nothing that we've heard in this room about how you want to interact with your customers suggests you have any interest in instilling fear in people. And that's a great theme to talk about. Dr. J, you said you wanted to step in at this point.
Yes, before you go to the next exercise.
Yes.
I got 2 reasons to step in. Now, you know, we are quick to use the term illiterate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you see all the illiterates today?
Yes.
Which says what? We ought to be careful who we label illiterate, because it may just be a comprehension issue. And by labeling somebody illiterate, we put a burden on them that they don't deserve when it is a matter of I didn't understand. And I make that point because none of us would say any of us are illiterate. But boy, did you just see it?
Yes.
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 What was the problem? Comprehension. Right? That's one point. And the second point that I wanted to make, we all missed it. Shanita got it a little bit. She's the only one that got it. And when we have these mass killings, they keep saying, everybody missed the signs. And you scratch your head and try to figure out, well, what sign did I miss? Well, in the lady's letter to us, and we called off all the words up there. There is one word that we didn't call off, which connects to last week's session in mental health. Now, what word is that? What'd you say?
I said desperate.
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 We all missed desperate. We can't do anything about desperate. But if you were trying to understand when people are saying there are signs, desperate is a sign. We can't do anything about it, but we might be able to refer it to somebody who can do something about it. So those were the 2 points that I wanted to make as we go to this next exercise. Be careful about who you call literate and illiterate, because we saw a lot of illiterate, if we want to use that word, among us today. Okay? And what it was comprehension issues. And then this business about cues. Desperate was missed. Shanita got it, but she didn't put it in that context, because we've been trying to talk about how you work across silos. We're inclined, if we see something, not to say something.
That's a good point.
Because, as Rick just pointed out, we are what? Lazy. Desperate would require us to do something else.
Yes.
And I know we all want to do that because we're trying to get beyond these darn silos, save people's lives, help people, serve people. And I just wanted you to see that it's easy to gloss over because it requires us to do something else, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
I would like to pick up on one thing that you said. You may or may not have noticed, Marta and I have made a deliberate decision today not to talk about literacy at all, because our point is that we're talking about comprehension issues that can affect anyone and affect everyone. And it doesn't, no matter who comes in the door, you are in the business of helping them in whatever way that you can. I think I'll also make the point that the term literacy doesn't just mean reading or not, writing or not. It really is actually about comprehension of different types of language use. So when it comes to dealing with housing regulations and the types of text that you are familiar with dealing with, I'm assuming many of your customers and Marta and myself have a very low level of that kind of literacy. And when I say that, I mean that kind of comprehension. It's very similar to, and this is something that people talk about a lot, going to the doctor and you hear all of this medical terminology and it may or may not mean something to you. It might mean different things to you. That is medical comprehension. You could call that medical literacy. It's the same type of scenario. And if we were in a hospital and you were a panel of doctors and medical billing personnel, we would be talking about the same types of adjustments that you can make. We would just be, instead of maybe an email about someone's housing assistance status, it might be an email about their latest lab results. So wherever we are, we can use these same themes that we're talking about today to address comprehension in general. And that's some of the background of how we designed our talk today. Now, at this point, we promised you in the beginning, and we've got a little under 30 minutes left, that we were going to talk about phone calls. And so we will do that because we promised to do that. All right. Now, we know from speaking with Beata and Imhotep that you have a call center. You field a lot of phone calls from customers. Ms. Wilson, you brought that up. We would like you to have we're going to play you a phone call that came in, and that's what the transcript that we've provided shows you, and we'll give you a chance to talk about that. Before we listen, these are the discussion questions that we would like you to discuss when we get to that point. And they're very similar to the discussion questions we had before. So what information was this customer asking for? What information could the DCHA have offered this customer to make this go more smoothly? Did the DCHA response communicate empathy and helpfulness? And were messages communicated clearly in this phone call? So the same types of discussion questions we were dealing with before.
Hello?
Hi, I can hear you very clearly.
Yeah, I'm trying to call about, my name is Wayne Davis. I'm calling about, I guess, check on my housing set. Hello?
Okay, we can check it for you, sir. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I thought you had hung up on me. That's why I said
No, I'll never do that.
This is
social, please.
It says, take one, if you still need affordable housing assistance, contact us.
Okay, well, what
So I'm gonna call.
Okay, you said you got a letter that said that?
No, I was reading the tag. It said, are you still on housing?
Okay.
Or are you on the waiting list, right? It says, take one, if you still need affordable housing assistance. But I'm trying to get out of this shelter. Hello?
Bring it back.
Sure, that's right.
That's what we have. We do apply to.
I just got wait till they, 2007.
Right, that's what you have.
Oh, no, I understand. I was still on 2002, huh?
I can't say, I don't know. I just can't get something to provide to you.
So I just got to be patiently waiting, huh? Yeah, I don't too much deal with the computer like that.
No problem. You just call us if you don't have access, okay?
All right, thanks.
No problem. Have a great day.
You too.
Let me provide some important context for this. This is the first time I've seen or read this. But let me provide some context for it. What I gathered from the call is that the gentleman that was calling in actually was responding to something that we did not put out.
Okay.
And so that's an important point here. One of the things that happens, and some of you may know this, not all, but one of the things that happens is particularly wherever you have a collection of desperate people, like say a shelter, you have people who will go around and try to leverage that for their own economic gain. I'm not suggesting that's what happened here. I'm just saying that sometimes it happens. And one of the things that happens, probably not here, but some other times, is that folks will actually sell access up the list. That's what this sounds like to me, is that, so this gentleman was calling, and we have never sent, to the best of my knowledge, and correct me if I'm wrong, folks, but I don't think we've ever sent anything to anybody that says, are you still on housing list?
Okay, let me interject. So they have now, they're purging the waiting list. They've been doing that for a couple of years, but they do have it. Update your information. There's information out there sending people to our website to come into the office to update the information to so that they can stay and remain on the waiting list.
Yes, ma'am.
So there is some literacy out there.
Right.
And that started when they closed the list.
Yes, when they closed the
So they had to
list.
inform the public that they closed the list, and this is what we're doing. We're trying to find out where you are on
Right.
this list.
Right. Does anybody know
But
who's
he said
managing?
I'm reading a sign. Yeah.
Yeah, and just so that everybody knows that we're all on the same page, what you just described is correct. Fortunately, it all runs through my office, so I know exactly what it says. We have no sign that says, we have no letter that says, are you still on the list? Because that isn't the language that we would be using. But that doesn't change wherever I think you guys are going. I just want you to have some context. Yes, ma'am.
Even my understanding was that there was a response to the Now campaign.
But,
Right.
the
To the
call,
Now campaign.
so the call was now, and then maybe, like you said, some literature that was floating out there that he saw and then responded to it as a result in the shelter now. Even though I know we closed, I mean, the Now campaign has been over, so it may be
Right,
something.
but it didn't say what he was saying that it said, so.
We released posters and things
That
to
had
shelter.
to take one.
Right, I got
Yes,
that.
where a sign could be read.
That's the whole point, is that
And
we
then had
read,
to
so
take
he
one
did.
slips.
Yeah, but I also
He didn't,
think
he
this
didn't,
is
he
what-
didn't,
this
he
is
didn't
what
understand the
example of that
message.
person maybe having
This
seen
is a
that
compromise.
misunderstood.
Right.
He misunderstood the sign,
Okay.
So we think that it was the Now campaign collateral that he came across.
but he misunderstood what.
But am I mistaken? Did we have, are you still on the list?
That's not, it just
I
said,
think what he
They
meant was,
said
are you
take
still in
one
need for
if you
housing
still need
assistance?
Okay.
affordable housing assistance.
Okay.
Great.
So I don't need to be so defensive.
but it's actually,
Yeah,
but
but-
it's actually a perfect example.
That's what.
All right. So let's regroup. We only have a few moments left, but thank you for that point about trying to figure out what could have happened here.
Triggered this conversation.
Right, and we are correct that there was some type of literature that was out there, and there seems to be a disconnect between what you wanted customers to do when they got that information and what was actually happening with that information. So that's the first step, and that's where we hope that clear written communication can stem that. But in a situation where it doesn't work, the next thing is going to be for a customer to come to you, right? And so that's where we are now in the chain. So we asked you what, we asked you these questions, but I'd like to think about what information could have been provided. So at the point when a customer comes to you directly, what you have to offer the customer is information, and thinking about what types of information could that be. So it might be the case that what you can say to the customer is, yes, we put signs, yes, there are signs saying, contact us to update your status. Is that what you're contacting us to do today, sir, for example? So if we actually, well, in the interest of time, so our main point is, this could be an activity that you do later, perhaps, is to go through this and think about what you wanted to tell this customer and when in the sequence of this could you tell the customer this information. Now, you didn't hear this because I cut it out when I uploaded this audio file to my computer. But one way that you can help phone interactions go smoothly is to manage them a little bit by, yes, you do listen to your customers, and that's good to create that connection by listening, but you can also guide the information by guide the interaction by giving the information that you want to give. So even in the very beginning, the first thing that we heard on the recording is the DCHA staff member saying yes. Now, okay, that is a way to start a phone call, but another way to start a phone call could be yes, or good morning, how can I help you? Good morning, what can I help you with? And something like that helps us in a variety of ways. A, it's friendly, right? And people are used to hearing that to start conversation, so we know how to deal with it. And it gives your customer the opportunity to tell you some things about themselves. Now, we also have to acknowledge we don't really know what we're going to get when you say, hello, can I help you? Your customer could, maybe they say a lot of things, we don't really know. But if that's what happens, you still have to listen. And I forgot I had a slide that would help me explain this. Okay, so we had 3 things that we wanted to talk about. The opening, which I've just talked about, so greetings and having something that directs where you want the conversation to go is a great way to start. And you also want to show your customers that you're listening. So give people space to talk. Even if they have a lot to tell you, you can learn a lot about what they need in that space, and giving people the space and trying as much as you can not to talk at the same time as them sends this message of connection that you're listening and you're taking it all in. And what we're referring to in lines 24 and 29 are 24 through 29, we've got the customer and the DCHA member talking at the same time as one another, as opposed to what we're recommending, which is giving your customers a chance to get their complete thoughts out. Even if what they are telling you isn't relevant to what you're trying to do, you can still listen and then say, all right, may I please have your social security number? So redirect after you've listened to what someone has to say. And the last point that we wanted to talk about was trying to figure out the end of this conversation. Now, we know some of it was hard to hear, but Marta and I were talking amongst ourselves, trying to figure out what should this customer have done next? Because one thing you can do when you're ending interactions like this is give people a direction or give people next steps. So what would they have accomplished by visiting the website? Can I visit the website to update my status? Should I be visiting the website to check and see what my status is? Should I be visiting the website to learn about other agencies that can maybe help me meet my goal of getting out of the shelter? So think about, what do you want people to do next after they get off the phone with you, and make sure you tell people that before you end the interaction.
You give direction on the website.
Right.
And I thought that was very important. As far as going into detail what they're going to find on the website, actually, she gave him the clear direction to go to the website. And once he gets to the website, the resources and everything be clear there. That to save the time of the conversation, because as you can see, he wasn't too sure what he was asking of her either. But I did like what she directed him
to the website.
I want to say that it says treat here, but that's not what he said. He was saying that he doesn't know how to work the computer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's what he was saying.
But, and he was in a shelter, so I would think that we would already tell him where he could go to get access to a computer, where someone can help him on the website.
Oh,
But
right,
he
well,
already was, he was already at a.
Yeah, he was saying he doesn't know how to work the computer.
Okay.
And that's what he was saying. She gave him the website. He said, I don't know how. He was saying he didn't know how to, but redirected him to come down so that someone could assist him, or go, to another place.
They just call back.
Even so we made the point that maybe in the very beginning of this conversation, the customer doesn't say something that's more specific, such as, I'm calling to select a different preference structure category, right? He doesn't say something specific like that, but what you can do is say, in addition to saying, how can I help you, but I can do the following things. So I can tell you what your status is. Would you like to know your status? I can tell you how long you've been on the list. Would you like me to tell you how long I've been on the list? So you've got the goods, you've got the currency, you've got the information, and offering what you can tell people can help guide your interactions in a good direction sooner, so that there's less chance for them to go off the rails, shall we say, later. We'll stop here and wrap up and give you a chance to ask any other questions or concerns that you might have. Yes.
I got a question regarding the field. How could we close the communication gap with tenant-generated violations so they can understand exactly what is entailed with the violation? Because they have, as a landlord, 28 days to do the repairs. And if they don't understand the violation and we go back, it put them in termination status. And a lot of times when we come back, the different inspectors, we can explain at the property, but it's too late then because we still have to have it as tenant final fail. But maybe if they known ahead of time, they would know, how to address the violation that they're responsible for.
Right. So there are a couple of levels here. So, right, getting kind of ahead of this and talking to people early about what I'm assuming you mean is talking to people early about what are the things that can go wrong so they avoid them going wrong?
Mainly if once they fail for something in their home, and so they have to know what to do for the repair or understand the repair to go about fixing it, because what they have is literature that we leave with the violations.
Right.
If it's something that they are responsible for. So a lot of times we can explain it to them verbatim, which we do walking through their home, and they'll nod their head, but sometimes they may be embarrassed to explain to you that they really don't understand. So it may be, of course, in contracted terms, or maybe just general terms like, for example, tub is obstructed, drain is obstructed. So you can explain it to them and it's okay, but then later on, they wouldn't understand that we meant that your tub was just stopped up and you're responsible for it.
Well, just say your tub stopped
So
up.
say that.
But all right, so
Well, what I'm saying is when we putting everything into our computer and we going through these homes and doing the violations, sometimes they'll nod and understand what you're saying, as I explained right then and there. But when they get the violations later and they have to read through this and say, well, I'm going on the 3rd floor, yada, yada, yada. When they reading it, it doesn't say, well, just your tub stopped up. They reading tub obstruction.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
I do.
So we come back in those 28 days, it puts a lot of tenants in jeopardy of being final fail and having to go through a whole another long process that can be alleviated had they understood. And landlords deal with that too sometimes.
Right.
The same situation.
If I can just respond to that. So obstruct, I think that's the problematic word, right? The word obstruct that they're maybe not understanding.
Well, yeah, maybe if I guess you were saying having different things on the web that they can go to, or maybe it can be something as well for tenants to be able to go to things that have pictures so they can understand what the violation is and what it looks like.
Right, pictures, examples.
Just basic, just a
plain
basic
language,
overview of different things that are common that we always fail, so they really understand, because they may fix something that they think it is,
Right.
and we'll say, well, nah, is this, but technically we still have to film it.
Right.
You know, because they only have 28 days pretty much to get it right.
Yes, so the time pressure, and you're right, the stakes are very, very high. And so what I see here is not only using plain language, giving as many examples as possible. So saying, problem with tub, for example, tub doesn't drain, tub needs more grout, tub needs whatever else that tubs need. This is a hypothetical example. So giving clear information, giving examples, some of the tips that we've pointed out. If there could be a way to incorporate pictures, that's something definitely to discuss. But it's not only having that plain and clear communication as much as you can, but realizing that it has to happen at all steps of your interaction with your customers. So in the very beginning, you may have to talk to people about it face to face, and the paperwork that they get at a later state should match the way it's been talked about earlier on. Yes?
And sorry, just to add to that, and I think when you're going, so you seem to suggest that you go through this list with them and they kind of just nod.
Correct.
Because I think people don't like to admit that they don't know something, so maybe as you're going through it, and this is a burden on you, of course, but saying, okay, tub obstructed means this, and just say it, because I think you have to use that term on the paperwork.
We always explain when we giving violations. That's not the problem. It's the problem once we leave their presence. You know, a person can nod and say, I understand that. But then when that timeline starts to get smaller, then you have to get your violations taken care of. And maybe they can't convey it to a contractor or what a family member they know that can do the repairs. We're not talking about just when the maintenance are going to be responsible. We're talking tenant-generated violations that they are solely responsible for.
How do they get that written form? How do they get that? Does that come in the mail? Or
that comes in the mail, and we also leave it at the property.
So part of it is context, right? So it's the time in which the communication is happening. So at the time when you're explaining to them, this is about an obstructed tub. Let me tell you what an obstructed tub means. In that context, at that particular moment, they're getting it. They understand it. They're like, okay, got it. And then you give them the piece of paper, and a week later they may look at it, or it shows up in the mail a couple of weeks later. Then now you're in a different time.
Correct.
You're in a obstructed. What the heck? What did he say?
See, there you go.
Right. And
correct.
So the time, and there's a couple of issues. One is we got to figure out how to bridge that. We can't control time, but what we can do is control how we talk to folks and how we communicate with them. And so we've got to figure out, in this example, how to unpack what the word obstruct means, so that it means the same thing when you're telling them, and when they have that piece of paper a week later, and 3 weeks later whenever they're looking at it again, and then 4 weeks later whenever it's time to fix it, right? So that burden is on us as an institution.
Okay.
Thank you. Let's have, I'm sorry, go ahead, Fred.
And some people are visual. That's why the pictures will be good. Me, I'm a visual learner. Like I could never do an online class. I have to be in class, see my teacher. That's the way I can learn. So you'll say it's obstruct. They forget. You ain't told them, baby, your tub stop. Go get some drink. Pour it down in your drink. 2 weeks later, it's good. What did he say, Jeff? But if you take a picture and say it stopped up, go buy some Drano. I know somebody will get some Drano, unstop the tub. They can remember that. Oh, Drano, the tub is stopped up. Got it. They're visual. People learn that way. They can remember because they're visual.
Let's thank them for coming to